Okay, so I'm going to try to do true to my 30 minutes, and I don't know what's wrong with me, but I actually want to have this conversation with the church about God, money, possessions, and giving. In fact, the truth is, I asked to do this particular lesson. Sorry, brother, killed it again. All right, so while he's doing this, we'll get it up. I'm just going to ask you to advance the slides from back there. All right. Why this topic? Why now? Is this just a lead up to special contribution? Yeah. We asked. We asked to push the special because we didn't do a good job as a leadership group giving you notice and time and really training. Fenton alluded to it, but we've got a different congregation than we had 5 years ago. Some of you have not been through any training about God, money, possessions, and giving. But you know what? Church, we celebrate you. It's still the DNA and the heart of this church to be giving. We salute you. God salutes you. However, and I know they stoned the prophets, I'm going to bring you the word today. And I want you to check your heart. And Fenton and I have this debate. Is this a teaching or is this a sermon? You're going to judge at the end of it. And the way we're going to know is, did it affect your heart? Did the word penetrate to help you have a deeper understanding and a deeper conviction about where are you in your relationship with God, money, possessions, and giving? And you know what? This isn't just about special coming up at the end of the month. Why now? I've been wanting to do this sermon for a long time because it has deeply impacted my character, my flaws, my sin. It has been a part of me that I've had to deal with, and I'll get to exactly why this was one of many addictions that I tried to fill up identity with, security with. The last thing that God wants you to do is idolize money and possessions and anything that is other than Him. Jesus came to teach us a whole nother understanding about money, and you're going to hear me, yes, brothers and sisters, I'm going to talk about the Old Testament and tithing. And yes, brothers and sisters, I'm going to tell you that Jesus is going to raise that ante. He doesn't want a little bit of your first fruits. He wants it all. He didn't call you to have a heart of money that had limits on it. In fact, that's just one piece. He didn't need your money. He wants your heart. He wants your time. He wants you to understand what love is. Jim Albert and I used to have this discussion about how easy and how complex love is. I think it's incredibly brilliant what God did to demonstrate through Jesus' life, through his death, burial, and sacrifice in the cross, and then his resurrection. The arc of the entire narrative of our existence with God was demonstrated in love. But it didn't come cheap, and it shouldn't be cheap for us. So why now? I've been wanting to do this lesson outside of the special, but I am going to talk about special. But honestly, that's not my main focus. I really pray that you let the scriptures and the contemplative questions that I want to pose to you not just be about what happens on the end of September. This is about the rest of your life. This is about kingdom impact and eternal impact. Now, I had asked Fenton to just tease up. I'm going to give a lot of credit to Randy Alcorn. He wrote a book. Back then, it was called God, Money, and Possessions. Now he's changed it to Money, Possessions, and Eternity. But when I was a young baby attorney, back in the days I was doing my Perry Mason track, I was on an airplane flying back and forth to see clients. And very early on, it had a really formative impact. It sobered me. I was a baby disciple. I mean baby, like second year. And I didn't come from a religious background. I came from a military background, and we moved all over, and it was sort of convenient whether we did or didn't go to church. But boy, he just knocked my socks off. But it wasn't Randy. There's about 75% of the book I agree with. There's 25% that guy says now. I looked at him and went, ooh, can't agree with that. But you know what? It was the word that's going to have the impact. Yeah. So this is timely for our lives. It's timely, way past special. Why is Ron preaching today? Because he asked. I asked my brothers and the elders. I talked to the full ministry team. I talked to Fenton. And it's going to be great. Fenton's going to continue this series. But I want to share some of my background, and I'm going to do this a little slow up front, and believe me, we're going to go fast in the middle. Like I tell my clients, I work as a strategy and a compensation and an evaluation person in healthcare. Pretty complex stuff. I draw on my legal background. But I tell my clients, I'm from the South, but I don't talk slow. So buckle up. A little bit ago, pre-COVID, in 2019, I started having an absolute meltdown. because I wasn't dealing with trauma that happened in my earliest years. I went through stuff I couldn't even name. I couldn't put a name on it. One side of the brain wouldn't talk to the other side. And it had an impact on me. And if you want to go back, it's posted. I won't go through all the details now. But it took a lot to try to come before you as a congregation and just share that journey, because why I wanted to share is how God really rescued me. I've apologized to Kim. I'll apologize again to my kids. I've apologized. There are things that you would not know on the outside. You looked at my life, and I don't think I was being duplicitous. I really was trying to do with what one brain and one part of my soul, one part of my character could deal with, but the other side was jammed up. It was absolutely out of touch. And I had been using my workaholic nature. I was involved in pornography. I was definitely using food as an addiction. I had all these things that I was trying to do to build identity and security because I had such self-loathing. There were many days I didn't want to be on this earth. I was so full of shame, so full of regret, not just because of what had happened to me, but what that pattern led to in terms of my sinful responses. One of the most important things I want to share with you, though, is in that meltdown, which Greg and Vicki just were part of a team that helped rescue me and helped me and Kim through a lot of that. And I will continue to lift up Steve Brand, an excellent therapist. But it was the word that finally I had to get to this place where I had to surrender. I had never really, I would have told you to the core of my being, I had surrendered and given control to God. I had not, evidenced by the rest of my addictions and the way I was doing this life. Because when you surrender and you really say, there ain't no me in control here, it's God. If you have not really gotten there, and I was 59 years old and I'd been a disciple since I was 27. Kim and I were the first baptized couple in St. Louis with that planning. We helped it go from 40 to 400. It was an awesome ride. But you know what? God was patient with me. I don't know if I could have handled it. I think I would have committed suicide earlier. I mean, I'm serious. I could not handle the shame. I couldn't name it. But it's been amazing lifting that burden to say God is not just good. If you don't know the whole story from C.S. Lewis writing about the Chronicles of Narnia, there's a wonderful line in there where the children are meeting Aslan, the lion who represents Jesus, and they go, "Is he good?" And the animals laugh and say, "No." But is he safe? They say, "Is he safe?" No, he's not safe, but he's good. When I looked God in the eye and said, I have to surrender, it has been an absolute rescue. So many things have changed. One of the things I got in touch with, literally, I'm not making this up, this one side of the brain, I did learn how I had relied on money, not so much the money part, but prestige or identity from work. My workaholic nature was because I was so empty, I was filling it up. And most importantly, the lesson I want to share here, I was really using this for me to be in control. I would have told you otherwise. You would have seen me do a lot of good things. The behavior didn't always tell that. You have to decide today. The scriptures we're going to go through fairly quickly, and this is going to be a lesson posted on the website. We'll have a link. There's a lot of words on there, but it's the scriptures. Read them. Yeah. Now, you can get mad at me today for some of the things I'm going to say, but you're really getting mad at God. You can say, well, that's just your interpretation. Okay, let's have a discussion. All right? So there's a lot to get through here, but it's most important that we start this out with, do you want to get well? Jesus asked the cripple at the side of the pool. Do you want to be disciples and everything that means? Wow. Yep. Are you ready to really understand when Jesus says, I invite you to pick up your cross? And the rescue for you, he said, the blessings, we'll talk in financial terms, the ROI, the return on investment is beyond anything you can imagine. Now, Randy Alcorn and I are going to have a little debate. Can you go to the next slide, please? He talks in his book about how much if you use your attitude towards money, possessions, and particularly giving, you're building up treasures in heaven. And he puts a lot of focus about, why are you being so stupid thinking you're going to hoard things in this life? The old joke is there's never a U-Haul behind a hearse. You can't take it with you. But his truth was, there is this dual lesson from God about how you use what he has entrusted with you. It's true. And he holds us to account. And Jesus talks about there's different mansions and there's different. So Randy's thing is it's all about, why are you being stupid thinking you're going to make most of your money impact in this earth? But I don't like the way he devalues the joy, the positive impact, the call to be fiduciaries, stewards, brothers and sisters that help each other in this life. I don't like his balance. There's another brother out there, N.T. Wright, one of my other favorite people. And I think he sets a better balance. That's another sermon for another day. But from the very beginning, God knew that he wanted us to understand and appreciate things. In fact, he entrusted us. When you look at the story in the ark, from the very beginning of creating us in Genesis 1 and 2, it was good. He put us in the Garden of Eden. Our role was to be overseers for all that was on the earth. He wanted us to use it to advance that kingdom. And then the way God created us, we had agency, and we used our free will, and we rebelled. In fact, what the first act of greed was, we wanted what? The fruit, because we wanted to be like God. We wanted to be in control, right? First act of greed. And you know what? Genesis 3 on forward, it's been a struggle ever since. Our efforts to make idols of something. What is it for you? What's your idol? How does money fit into that? But you know what, church? I'm going to say this bluntly. Be sober about your attitude here in Atlanta, here in the U.S., about whether you think you're rich or not. Because we don't. Nope. Not only have we rebelled ever since we walked out of that garden, even though God gave us all these things, we always wanted more. It's never been enough. But do we enjoy a perspective, the big perspective of where we're at? Look, around the world, the U.S. is by household income, we're the 7th richest nation. But these are tiny little nations, super tiny ones that are bigger. Although Australia fit in there. I don't know how that worked. All right? But listen to this. In the world, after taxes, if you have $60,000 and one kid, you're in the top 1% in the U.S. Globally, average household income is about $12,000. Do you get that? If you're in the U.S. and you have $120,000, I'm sorry, that $6,000 was no kids. $120,000, one kid, you're in the top 1%. If you have $160,000 and two kids, you're in the top 1%. I don't know where you are. One of the things is the elders and the ministry said, we don't know your individual giving, very deliberately, because we don't want to have an attitude. We don't know. But here's what I do know. The profile of this church is not wildly different in terms of the number of givers. We have people that are sitting in the room today who give nothing. That's a problem. We have people in this room who give less than 1%. We're going to talk about that's a problem. It's not a problem with me, guys. You're going to have your problem with God. The next slide, please. So why in the world are we going to talk about this? Because Jesus talked about this. There's an argument that he talked about God, money, and giving more than any other topic. It's not entirely true. There's more text on this, about 15% of the written text, but he used financial illustrations more than anything else, more than faith, more than prayer. Now, my argument is really the high topic he talked about was kingdom. But 3 out of the 10 commandments that God laid down were trying to prevent us from being greedy. Put God above everything else, not you, not other things. Don't steal. Why would you steal? Because I want more. Don't covet your neighbor or anything else. There are over 2,300 verses on money, wealth, and possessions. And you know what? I wish I could go through all of them today. I can't. I got to select a few, and I know Fenton and others are going to keep preaching on this topic. But you got to also understand, Jesus got a sense of humor. Like when he's being challenged, the Pharisees are always trying to set him up to kill him, and they're like, you going to pay taxes? Trying to basically get him in trouble. And he goes, Peter, go fish. Pull that fish out. What's he pull out? 2 coins. He said, whose face is on that? Caesar's. Give to Caesar what is Caesar. Give to God what is God. Oh, Pharisees got frustrated and shut him one away. Church, give to God what is God's. So one of the most important topics that Jesus did, 11 of his 39 parables are about money. Okay? He used those financial illustrations over and over. I'm not going to get into today, but just think about how he used the parables of the lost pearl and the coin and others. What am I supposed to do? Give away everything to get the kingdom. There's no possession. There's nothing you own. There's nothing in your idol, your addiction, whatever it is that's more valuable than you being in fellowship with God, you being accepting his love. It's not about he loves you. What's your barrier to accepting that love? Why are you putting your currency in something else? And what is currency? It's just an exchange, right? And currency came a long time ago. It's like, okay, those 2 goats, I'm going to use X number of drachma. And then I'm going to turn around and use that drachma to buy some goods, right? It's exchange. What's your currency? We'll come back to that. Gold, which is used for the U.S. Reserve, Fort Knox and elsewhere, actual gold value as a precious metal it's way worth less than other precious metals. We've assigned value to it to back up the U.S. currency. It's a bit of a joke. And all through Scripture, God knew we were going to struggle with this. So that's why there's so much preaching on it. Look, in Leviticus, God was trying to instruct his early Israelites in how to have a relationship with him, and he was calling them in order to make sure that they were putting him first. So the expectation was that you would tithe a tenth of everything, not just after tax, not just before, everything, whatever you had every year. In fact, the tradition back in that time was there was 3 tithes. There was a tithe that was for the priests and to protect the temple and to support, frankly, the church back then. There was another tithe that was for special festivals, and every 3rd year they would do a special contribution, if you will, for the widows, the orphans, and the poor. What a concept. That was an expectation. Now, there's been calculations on what that was of the people's income. That's about 23% if you average it out over the 3 years, about how much supposedly got donated. I don't know what it was. The point is, it was an expectation, your first fruits. And I love what Jim preached earlier about, I'm sorry, your cow's the one that died. You gave your best. It was not acceptable to bring into the storehouse anything but your first fruits and your best. So there were also, on top of those tithes, free will offerings. God challenged, right before there's the silence, before Jesus comes on the scene, between Old Testament and New Testament, in Malachi, God knocks the socks off the Israelites and said, you are robbing me. What are we doing? They said. He said, when you don't bring your tithe and you don't honor me, you rob me. Are you robbing God because you're not bringing your first fruits? This is not about a percentage. I'll get back to that. It's about what's your heart towards what you hang on to and what you give. And, I have so much debt. I have so much. Listen, compared to others in the world, compared to where the disciples were, the earliest followers of Christ, you just got to change your lifestyle.
Amen. That's real.
I'm serious. What am I hanging on to? We're going to talk about financial peace. Now, this is one of the ways that God wanted us to be set up to win. Do not give your idols to debt or money or other things. Let's go to the next slide, please. So the creator of the universe, Jesus emptied himself and came to be here on this earth to demonstrate God's love. And he taught us how to love. But he called us. You don't love with a tithe. You love with everything. In fact, he commended and ratified 2 of the prior teachings from the Old Testament. In Luke 10:17, when he was challenged by, what's the greatest commandment? He said, look, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Is that with a little piece? Is that a fraction? Where's my teens? Okay, we're going to do some algebra. Everything is his. Next slide, please. Jesus taught us how to follow his Father and others sacrificially. He challenged us to live boldly. Yeah, we are absolutely out of our friggin' minds if you talk to the rest of the earth. They think Christians are absolutely nuts. God says, my wisdom is not your wisdom. Your wisdom is not mine. Yep. Jesus came to turn it upside down. Yep. And he went from the Old Testament teaching about loving and being in covenant to a whole new covenant. We want to be disciples at Cornerstone. Yep. Do you want to be disciples in every way with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind? Or do you have limits on that? What's your idol? He says, by this, everyone's going to know you are my disciples if you love one another. You know one of the ways the Christians made the biggest impact throughout history? They protected the non-Christians. They became known for being giving and hospitable. They created some of the earliest hospitals. They rescued people that were in dire financial trouble. And then he says in Luke 9, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life with me will save it. There's a math equation. What good is it, he reasons, what good is it to someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? What is it that you're holding on to? Next slide, please. But look, he calls out the temptation of money. He knows that it's hard. Remember, when Jesus was getting ready to launch his ministry and he went into the desert for 40 days, what did the tempter do? What did Satan come and do? He tries to challenge him and tempt him with power and pleasure and wealth. Right? That's where Satan went to, because he knows those are always things that we're drawn to replace God. And then he says, look, get it straight, guys. No one can serve two masters. Either you're going to hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve God and money. He's not saying you won't try. Because we do. We are duplicitous in our minds. We hedge. He says you can't. Get it? This math doesn't work. So, go to the next slide, please. In fact, Jesus had such a passion about getting it straight that he got indignant. Now, there's a whole thing about it. Was this sin or not sin? I really believe it was righteous zeal. In fact, that's what the disciples pointed out. When he watched in the temple what was going on, and the thing that Jesus got the most upset about was religious hypocrisy. Get that straight. The quote, other sinners, he loved them. He said, I came for them. But who did he absolutely rebuke? Who did he condemn as a brood of vipers? Who did he go after here? Religious hypocrites. We don't want to become religious about our money either. But when it was time for the Passover, Jesus went up into Jerusalem. In the courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, the ones that did survive Jim, and others sitting at tables and exchanged money. So he took the time to make a whip. He's watching this, and he makes a whip. He's very deliberate. This wasn't impetuous. Get that? This is very deliberate. What does he do? He drove out them all from the temple courts, both the sheep and the cattle. He scattered the coins and the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market. And then the disciples remember that's written, zeal in the house of the Lord will consume me. Jesus has some pretty strong opinions about even the wrong religious use of money. We are sobered as elders, as ministry team, as a board. We are sobered about what you entrust. But it's not about us. You need to be sobered about what are you doing? Where's your market? Wow. Slide 9, please. Next slide. You know, Jesus went out of his way to point out some differences. I think many of us know the story of the widow. And he deliberately watched her. He was close enough to her, he could see her. She put in her 2 little coins, and he lifted her up as an example to always be talked about. Why? Because out of faith, this was a corrupt system, right? But she trusted God. And she put her money in, and he said, this woman is to be commended. She has great faith. That's basically what he's saying. On the other side, go to slide 10. We can be, and this is taught in our culture as a good thing. Hey, I've done well. The market's been great. I got an extra bonus. Let me put that aside. And I'm going to not use it for any kind of other good for other people. He condemns in the story that what he calls the foolish. This rich, foolish man. I've got so much grain, I got to build bigger barns. And he says, are you out of your mind? He says, you foolish man, this very night, your life is going to be taken from you. And then here's the key. He said, you fool, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? He's not condemning that the man has money. He's condemning how he's not using it. Kim and I have this expression about giving away with a warm hand. We've known poverty and we've known wealth and we've been everything in between. But we made some decisions. I'll talk a little more about that later. Don't just think it's about storing up. There is the joke about in the U.S., he who dies with the most toys wins. That's not how Jesus would look at it. That's not how he looked at this man. He said, who'll get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with those whoever stores up things for themselves is not rich towards God. Yeah. Next slide, please. What about Zacchaeus and the rich young ruler? Zacchaeus was known as a tax collector. Now, in that time, the tax collectors, they were known to be a little shady. Little pocket here, a little pocket there. That's how Matthew got so wealthy. Levi before he was called Matthew. Just like he tells the soldiers, don't extort. Believe me, one of the most hated things you could be was a Jew who became a tax collector, which is what Matthew's story is. You talk about repentance. And Zacchaeus was one of those brethren in the tax collectors, and he climbs a tree because he wants to see this guy Jesus he's heard about. And Jesus goes to him and says, you know what? Today, I'm going to dine in your home. Zacchaeus is so moved. He says, look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. He's moved. And if I have cheated, this is a joke, if I have cheated, and if I've cheated anybody out of the thing, I'll pay him back 4 times. The man just bankrupted himself. I'm not kidding. Right? And you think the people around him that heard that didn't call him on it? And what about the story of the rich young man? Supposedly the man came to him and said, one version has he's trying to justify himself, right? He's trying to make himself look good. And he's like, how do I get in the kingdom? He says, look, you got to obey the commandments. I've done it always. And then Jesus hears that and he falls in love with him. He falls in love with him enough that he's going to ask him to follow him. Do you know how important that would be to be a rabbi that has an invitation? That was like super high honor. Right? It's why the mothers and the fathers of the earliest disciples were like, you take these young guys. It's such an honor. But this guy, when he was challenged, Jesus says, one thing you lack. Go, sell everything you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. The man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Jesus looked around and said to his disciples, how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Whew. So he calls us to be good stewards. Next slide, please. He calls us to use what he entrusts us. What is a steward? Somebody who the master's given goods or services and he wants you to use it to good. Really, he wants you to grow it. He gives us talents, time, grace, more. And there's different stories you can read later. Luke, Matthew, the shrewd manager of the parable of talents and the minas. And basically, he's not condemning people who are trying to grow it. He's condemning those who have a heart that they won't work at it. They don't trust him. He entrusts. The ones he lifts up, they never forgot who the master was. They never forgot whose talent or mina or whatever it was. Next slide, 13. Jesus calls us to invest in the eternal, not the temporary. Do not store for yourselves on earth where moths and vermin destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven, and where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, your heart will also be. This is combined when he's saying, don't worry. Put your trust in God. Put your identity in God. He's your currency. I thought he was mine, but that surrender allows him to be mine. Next slide, please. Look, there are a couple of scriptures that I think get misused. In the early church, in Acts, we are all blown away by as the Spirit moves and all these disciples. And then we're taught about the fellowship of the earliest believers. And they devoted themselves to the teaching. And everybody was selling their positions and bringing it out. I want to explain something here. I don't think the command is for you to have to go do that to be, quote, a good follower and a good steward. These are people that got thrown out of the synagogue. These are people that basically were now in a community where they had no chance to make money, or they were displaced. And I think that the heart of selling and giving to the need is great, But these people were laying down and taking care of lots of brothers and sisters that really had no other means. Today, I don't think it's about necessarily expecting that if you have anything, you have to sell it all. But he does expect, where's your heart towards it and how do you use it? Next slide, please. But we are called to follow the example of the early church. In 1 Corinthians, they gave regularly. It was a weekly giving. Why? Check your heart. Check your heart. Remember, Jesus wasn't just calling us to follow the tithing. He's saying, honor me. And Paul taught that, as did the other apostles. Next slide, please. The call was to give from your heart. Look, this church, we are talking about special, but special will take care of itself. You'll move your hearts to what you can give. This is about lifelong being disciples. Why don't I want to preach this so much? I think it's an incredible thing that we have a chance to do as disciples, to give, to honor God. But why? Because it checks our heart. In 2 Corinthians, remember, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion. Back in the day, we were told how much to give for special. I'm just saying, 17 to 20 times your regular. It was a false man-made thing. It wasn't helpful because that wasn't from your heart. Cornerstone, you have way out past the normal giving for those who give. You know that? The households that give, by average, you outpace it. You do this. But do it out of a heart that isn't under compulsion. God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things at all times you have the need. He'll abound in every good work. As is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. You are investing in God. You're investing in forever. Slide 17. But Paul warns about there will be teachers that will come in and misapply the heart about money, God, and possessions. They'll teach you about either asceticism, it's not good to enjoy any of this, or materialism. That's where your security is. Godliness, in 1 Timothy 6, godliness with contentment is great gain, whether you're rich or poor, relatively. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Comparison is also. You start comparing yourself. I don't have this, but he or she has that. That's what every commercial's about, baby. You need this to make you happy. It's the American way. Is it God's way? Even in your own family, we can get jealous and we can start thinking about what we have and don't have. It's a root of evil because it starts to put something else ahead of trusting God, something else about what matters the most. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. I got 2 more slides, and then we'll wrap up. Sorry, I'm going a little bit over. So where do we go from here? Understand there's a practical side to this. God wanted your heart to honor him, but he also wants to meet real needs, right? It isn't just about us, it's about others. And by the way, this isn't even just about Cornerstone. His heart for you to call you to give is to whatever you decide will help advance his kingdom. Kim and I give to many things, time, money, service, that have nothing to do, well, they have, many of them are now affiliated with Cornerstone, but they really didn't start with Cornerstone. And I'm going to lift my wife up. Speaker's privilege. In Romans 12, 6 through 8, there's 7 spiritual gifts that get lifted up. Prophecy, serving, teaching, encouraging, giving, leading, and mercy. My wife is one of the most giving people about children I know. And we have, like, you're like, okay, you're a rich white dude. What are you talking about? I have been there when I have been working 70, 80 hours at relatively low money. I have gone through many, many reorganizations. I have had to work all the way since I was basically 14. I ran out of money in law school. I ran out of money before that in undergrad, and I didn't have help. And but for the rescue, actually, of Kim's grandparents, or my taking a semester, I'd never make it through. I was the first kid to go to college, let alone grad school. I left the law firm I was part of because I was rising star, because I saw that I could have had partnership. I would have lost my family. What I was giving and selling my soul for wasn't good. I did not have that gift. But God has also helped me to repent and to grow. We have so much more fun giving, I promise you. But it meets real needs, right? We joke about sometimes with Operation Christmas Child. I ask him, how much is that box worth? And she's like, what do you want to know? I said, such a small amount of money and such a big impact, right? I get all excited about it. God gave first to us. He didn't hold back. There's nothing he did not give us. So he gave to us to set the example. Do we respond in our heart? Is giving part of a response? I love this quote from Karl Barth. Gratitude follows grace as thunder follows lightning. Put that visual. There's the lightning. Where's our response? There was a response in the Bible. Look at Zacchaeus. Look at Matthew, the prodigal son, the woman with the alabaster jar. We can go down the list. And these aren't even just the big stars, right? The disciples, most of them followed Jesus into a martyr's death. What are we ready to do to follow in grace? Not just giving money or possessions, but our heart, our time, our loyalty. Where is our identity and our security? But we do support the needs of other churches and communities. And I don't apologize for asking you to help support this community. That's God, I think, wants us to worship in community. So that's part of it, but it's way beyond that. But even if you want to take Randy Alcorn's view, and it's self-interest, right? Store up treasures in heaven. Go ahead, spend crazy, right? But even if it's storing up those treasures in heaven, remember this great quote from C.S. Lewis, aim at heaven, and you'll get earth thrown in too. Aim at earth, you'll get neither. Right? Next slide. We're going to call it close here. So these are some questions I ask you to think about. Again, this is going to be posted. I want you to go back and really, this is not a one-week thing. This is a life thing. Fen's going to continue in the series. But I wanted to preach, teach, whatever you want to call it. If it's moved your heart, I'll call it a sermon. It moved mine. It should move all ours. What is your highest currency? Where does your security and identity really come from? What is your attitude about money, possessions, and giving? It should be deliberate and prayerful, consistent and voluntary, sacrificial and excellent. Like Jim said, don't give the bad calf, or the one that's dead. Cheerful. And most importantly, Cornerstone, I call us to see this not as a difficult topic, but an act of love, an act of worship. It's between you and God. Whether you give to Cornerstone, whether you give elsewhere, but don't rob from him. Don't steal in any way. And Fenton will continue, because it's not just money and possessions, it's all the rest of who we are. Do we want to follow Shema? Love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind. It's about that. So give something. For those of you who are doing nothing today, I challenge you. Go back and read these scriptures. For those of you who are doing well, I commend you, but it's not about me having any opinion at all, and I don't want to know. But you are going to have a much more healthy relationship, transforming into the heart of Jesus when you imitate the way he loved, the way he viewed God, money, and possessions. Thank you.